Okay, hopefully you were able to kind of think through on this one that if you have 3x squared, you're not allowed to have that. Remember that to complete the square, a has to equal 1. So hopefully you're kind of able to just think through this and think of factoring. You can just divide out the 3. So if you divide out the 3, then what you're left with is x squared minus 4x plus 2 equals 0. Okay? But if I'm completing the square, it doesn't really need to equal 0. What I need to do is I need to have a perfect square trinomial, okay? So I'm going to move that over to the other side and then add in what I need. So x squared minus 4x equals -2. Okay. Some people like to think of it as like, what more do I need to turn this into a PST and like add it? And then they never move anything over to the other side. And then they add to one side and not to both sides. And then that's kind of where they go wrong. And so I always like to just move it over and like add in my fresh number, okay? So remember to find out what C is. It's just B divided by 2, so -4 divided by 2 squared. Hopefully you're getting kind of fast at that, and that's fine if you're doing mental math on that, okay? So add 4 to both sides. Now it's gonna factor because I made it a PST. So x minus 2 squared equals 2. And then now I can just solve it by square root. Once you have something squared equals a number, you can just square root both sides and go from there. So x minus 2 equals plus or minus √2. And then add 2 to both sides. And remember that your radical has to go at the back. Like we don't say plus 2 over here because then it's confusing as to like where does the radical end. So I'm going to say 2 plus or minus √2. That's it. Okay. Over here, kind of have the same problem. I also have the problem that like everything is kind of all on different sides. So start by moving things where they need to go. So I need all my like x's on this side, my constants on the other side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract the x over here, and then I'm going to subtract the 3 and move it over there. So when I do all of that, I get 2x squared minus 2x, because I move the x over. Then I'm going to move the 3 to the other side, so now I have 6, okay? Then I can make a equal 1 and figure out what to add. So divide out what the a is, because I need it to equal 1. So divide everything by 2. You want that leading coefficient to be 1. So now you have x squared minus x equals 3. And now I'm going to find out what c is. So remember that c is just b divided by 2, which is -1 in this case, divided by 2 squared, which would be 1/4. So now I'm going to add in a 4th on the left side, and I'm going to add in a 4th on the right side. And this is where you have to remember your fraction rules. Anytime you're adding fractions, you need a common denominator. So remember that this 3 isn't going to be 3/4, okay? It's going to be 3 times 4, which would be 12/4. I just took the 3 and I basically multiplied it by the common denominator, okay? So now this is going to factor to be x minus 1/2 squared. That goes kind of back to over here, right? Equals 12/4 plus 1/4 is going to be 13/4. And now I'm going to square root both sides because I can. That's part of why I turned it into a perfect square trinomial, okay? So this is going to be x minus 1/2. And then over here, remember you can't have a radical in the denominator, so that would be √13 over √4. And the square root of 4 is just 2, and then you're allowed to have a radical in the denominator, but we're solving, so it's going to be x minus 1/2 equals plus or minus √13 over 2. And then from there, add 1/2. Okay, and then this is where, if you think about it, if you add 1/2, that's going to be x equals, the half goes in front, so that would be 1/2 plus or minus √13 over 2. And it's fine to leave your answer that way. It's fine to even like split it and say 1/2 plus √13 over 2. But if you have the common denominator, you could just say x equals, it was 1 plus or minus √13, and then all of that was divided by 2. And this is really the best way to write your answer, is to kind of keep it as like joint as possible. I didn't write it like that. They're both over 2, so you can put the whole numerator together. And then I didn't write it as 2 different numbers. I just wrote it as that, even though it is 2 different values, okay? So let's do a couple more with fractions. So right here, this -2 is not the number that I need. Remember that always has to be positive. So I'm going to go ahead and move that over. So I'm going to have x squared plus 5x equals negative 2. And now I'm going to find the value of c that I need. So 5 divided by 2 squared would be 25 over 4. So now I'm going to add 25 fourths to both sides. And when I add 25 fourths, remember that I need a common denominator. So negative 2 over 4, 4 times negative 2 would be negative 8 fourths plus 25 fourths, okay? Now this is gonna factor to be x plus 5 over 2 squared equals negative 8 fourths plus 25 fourths is 17 fourths. And now I can solve this by square root. So square root both sides. So I have x plus 5 over 2 equals, well, that's root 17 plus or minus, right? Over root 4, which is really just 2. So that's just plus or minus root 17 over 2. And then I would end up subtracting this. Now, if you subtract it, it's just like what we said earlier. If they're both over 2, then just write your answer like this. Just say x equals negative 5 plus or minus root 17, and that's all over 2. And that's it. Okay. And now you kind of know why we're like not going back and plugging these in and checking them. That's something that you do like really want a calculator for. If not, it does kind of take a while. Okay. So let's take a look at one more. Okay. First thing I'm seeing is that this is 2 and it can't be. And this 5 needs to go over to the other side. But first let's tackle this 2 because I can't complete the square unless that's 1. So I'm going to start by dividing everything by 2. So I get x squared plus 3x plus 5 over 2 equals 0. Okay, now I'm going to move the 5 over 2 over to the other side. So x squared plus 3x, I'm going to leave a blank spot, equals negative 5 over 2. Okay, and I'm going to figure out what should go here. So remember that defines c, that's just b over 2 or 3 over 2 squared. Remember, this should always be a positive number. So that's going to be 9 fourths. And then over here, I'm also going to add 9 fourths. Now, they're both fractions. My common denominator is going to be 4. So just multiply this by 2. So that would be 4. That would be 10. Now I have common denominator, negative 10 fourths plus 9 fourths. Okay? Now, this side's going to factor to be x plus 3 over 2 squared equals negative, because this was a negative, so negative 10 fourths plus 9 fourths is negative 1 fourth. And now I can solve by square root. So square root both sides. So I have x plus 3 over 2 equals, okay, that's the square root of negative 1 over the square root of 4. That's what this is, okay? Same thing. So that square root of negative 1 is really just I plus or minus, okay? And the square root of 4 is just 2. So once you square root it, the square root of x plus 3 over 2 squared cancels right to x plus 3 over 2. And now I just have plus or minus I over 2. Subtract 3 halves. Notice still a common denominator. So I'm going to say negative 3 plus or minus I over 2. And that's your answer. Now, there's a lot more videos on how to complete the square out there on the internet. So if you're having trouble, remember that you can just search completing the square and you're going to find other videos on that. There's tutorials, there's other options. Let's just talk through how do you solve by completing the square, okay? Now, in a perfect world, this is best when a equals 1. So you don't have to do anything to a. A is already 1. And this works best when you don't have to add in fractions. So if you kind of go back, like this ended up being a fraction, that was a fraction, but this one wasn't a fraction, and like this one wasn't a fraction, because these were even numbers. So this is really best when a equals 1 and b is even. And if that's the case, then you can solve by completing the square, right? It's best when a is 1 and b is even. Remember, if it factors, you can still solve by factoring, and if there's no middle term, you could still do square root, okay? And then whenever you do that, so to solve, if a is not 1, that's your first step. Make a equal 1. Okay, after that, we made our c, right? So we make c And it has to equal b over 2 squared. And when I say make c, remember that you have to move your constants to the right. And then add c to both sides. Emphasis on both sides there. And that just goes back to like right here. I moved my constant, so I moved the -2 over to the other side, I added 2, and then I found my c value, I made c right, and I added it to both sides, okay? After you've done that, you've made a PST. So you've made a perfect square trinomial, so factor your perfect square trinomial. And I say PST, but remember that you can write perfect square trinomial if needed. And then once you've done that, now you've set it up so that you can solve by square root. And that's it. And don't forget that quadratics should have 2 answers, okay? Good luck on your assignment.